Hello, my name is Giorgio Piacenza. I was born in Lima, Peru, and I'm also a US citizen. I have been studying UFOs and what they may imply for science, philosophy, and society for over 45 years. In 1975, a group of friends, family members, and I, totaling about 12 persons, went by invitation from alleged extraterrestrials to an expected sighting or encounter that was to occur south of Lima in a place called Chilca. After my uncle, Tadeo Barquita, and another person had received, through very specific and dramatic automatic writing transmissions, an alleged invitation from respectful extraterrestrial beings who wanted to establish a long-term constructive relationship. In the middle of the beach area in Chilca, we saw a 45 to 50 feet in diameter lens-shaped object appear at about 300 to 350 feet away from us. We were by the shore. It hovered at about 10 feet over the Pacific Ocean and was visible for about 50 seconds. Then it disappeared almost as imploding and reappeared a few minutes later, remaining a few seconds and disappearing again after producing an illumination in the water that approached the shore. Right there and then I knew that contact with technologically advanced otherworldly beings in relation with spiritual evolutionary concepts, because those were the things that my uncle was receiving regarding mental evolution, spiritual evolution, was actually taking place. And I wanted to deepen this understanding, thinking that the intelligences probably had been here for a long time, and that perhaps they knew about human nature or why we were as we were, why we were so warmongering, our origins, purpose, and possibilities in the large scheme of things. I hoped to one day be able to converse with them, to understand what they knew about the purpose and organization of existence, the nature of God, esoteric principles, and who really was or had been Jesus the Christ, as well as other masters, spiritual masters on earth. I have a degree in sociology from Georgetown University and 3 degrees from John F. Kennedy University, including a degree in integral theory, but for the most part, I am an autodidact, an avid reader in physics, rational metaphysics, contactee accounts, perennial philosophy, sociology, psychology, history, and generally speaking, I am quite eager to understand how everything may connect comprehensively. I have participated in close encounter of the 5th kind contact attempts, and also with other kinds of voluntary contact groups, such as the Mission Rama contact group. Given conferences, written articles on various related UFO topics, and was twice an advisor to the Peruvian Air Force in its UFO research office. I am a member of MUFON, and the Mutual UFO Network, the largest civilian UFO research organization in the United States, and was in the board of directors of the Edgar Mitchell Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial and Extraordinary Encounters, also known as FREE, now becoming the Consciousness and Contact Research Institute, which studies multiple forms of experiencer contacts, also assisting experiencers trying to understand their importance under the general idea that consciousness is at the basis of these experiences across different realities. Its current web address is www.consciousnessandcontact.org. In the FREE organization, along with several scientists such as Emeritus Harvard cosmologist Rudy Shield and a highly experienced contact phenomenon researcher like Mary Rodwell, we produced an anonymous international in-depth quantitative and qualitative scientific survey in English and Spanish, to which more than 4,200 individuals from a total of 102 countries replied. The requisite for survey respondents was to consciously recall without hypnosis or drugs, their contact experiences with non-human intelligent beings in association with UFO sightings or events. And based on their testimonies, we found some unique and persistent patterns. It would be unreasonable to think that they were all lying or deceiving themselves. Remember that this was an anonymous survey, scientifically designed. We need to listen to so many persons giving these consistent testimonies worldwide. No matter how outlandish they seem, this is a very, very important happening in which many persons in different countries are having similar experiences. Unlike what is often presented by some researchers and documentaries and movies dramatizing or selectively focusing upon excessive negative interpretations, or also on some negative aspects of some contact experiences, in this international anonymous survey with a significant population, we found that a majority of experiencers or contactees did not consider their experiences negative or deleterious, that many had been healed of physical ailments, that most didn't want their experiences to end, and that there was an overall enhancement of their outlook in life, becoming less materialistic, more generous, more humanitarian, patient, spiritual, broad-minded, multi-perspectival, and ecological. They also began to experience more contact with other aspects of the otherworldly. For instance, through more out-of-body experiences, psi phenomena, and intersubjective communication with otherworldly beings. Again, it would be unreasonable to think that they were all lying or deceiving themselves. Today, there is no genuine, rational scientific excuse to dismiss or to ignore the truly anomalous or unconventional UFO and contact phenomena. We are even developing theories by which we could travel to the stars in a feasible, modified space-time bubble, Alcubierre bubble, without violating the speed of light limit, because there's no limit between two space-time frames, no limit in speed, according to the general theory of relativity. New applications with metamaterials, allegedly recovered from genuine anomalous UFOs, may provide us with a practical means. Recently, after becoming aware of the evidence presented by the Pentagon and by the US Navy through To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences, renowned string theory physicist Dr. Michio Kaku declared that the burden of proof has shifted away from UFO believers to the government, which would now have to demonstrate that we are not being visited by technologically advanced off-world beings. Thus, things are changing, and courageous, creative scientists are beginning to recognize the facts and offering their statements publicly. As integralists, we also need to recognize that there is a core number of cases of objectively verified anomalous objects that appear to instantly accelerate and to change directions under intelligent control. They seem to materialize and dematerialize, and that, without any classical means of propulsion, are seen to go inside mountains, including volcanoes like the Popocatépetl volcano in Mexico, to go inside large bodies of water, to move in the atmosphere and in outer space. If they were to move under the laws of inertia and gravity, as we know them classically, some of these accelerations would reach something like 300 and 400 Gs. And no structure, not even drones, would be able to withstand this, making sharp turns and stuff, maneuvering so rapidly. Some of these objects are being detected by infrared cameras others by radar, or by eyesight, or a combination thereof. And objects like these have been seriously researched for more than 7 decades, while attempting to apply the scientific method, and they have been witnessed worldwide for much longer than that. Unlawfully leaked but classified and lawfully declassified files have been steadily accumulating in the public domain for years. For instance, the CIA recently posted in 2019 another batch of files, not only inclusive of UFOs, but associated with parapsychological effects. Furthermore, countries like Brazil, the United Kingdom, and Spain have been constantly releasing for many years their formerly classified UFO files, and countries like Peru, Chile, and Uruguay have had official UFO research offices for quite some time, and various spokesmen have acknowledged that the phenomenon moving over their national airspaces is physical and genuine, often detected by radar systems and or visually by trained observers. Clearly, many of these objects appear to be metallic. As one I saw within 250 feet distance in Lima, Peru, one similar to an Adamski type of craft back in 1977. It looked similar to this one, and about this big from where I was, maybe even larger. This vertical area was not so tall, and instead of this hook, it had a little sphere on top. It had these 2 spheres on the bottom and a truncated cone in the middle, like the tip of this under this sphere, not the whole large sphere as depicted here, but like the tip, a truncated cone. And it was metallic color, silvery metallic, like so, like these parts here. General Nathan Twining wrote in a 1947 letter to Brigadier General Shulgin in reference to flying discs, as they were called then before the acronym UFO became popular, that these have to be considered real and not visionary or fictitious. Although they include a visionary aspect, now we know that, at the time he was remarking that they were also objectively real. It is a phenomenon that combines the objectively real with the visionary. More on that later. Moreover, these objects are regularly observed surrounded by a bright luminous energy field at night or by a light distorting field during the day. Now, technically speaking, an object is considered a UFO, or can also be called an unidentified aerial or aerospace phenomenon, UAP, only after it has been carefully studied by experts that can make an adequate determination of conventional or unconventional characteristics, and a conventional explanation cannot be truthfully assigned to it. That said, some of the UFOs can well be technologically advanced and truly otherworldly, what I may more specifically also call trans-realm utilizing inter-reality vehicles. But for simplicity's sake, here I will use the term UFO to refer to the last 2 meanings. While the US Air Force's Project Blue Book had an overall implicit and perhaps covert and explicit mandate to try to explain away in a conventional manner as many cases as possible, a much higher percentage of unknowns was confidentially reported within the Air Force institution itself. As UFO researcher and nuclear physicist Stanton Friedman exposed, Blue Book's Special Report number 14 showed that in general, about 22% of their cases remained as unknowns. but also that if the witnesses were more highly credible, this percentage was even higher. This finding contradicts the idea that UFOs are seen and reported only by uneducated, fantasy-prone individuals. This is a publication that contains the special report, Blue Book Special Report number 14. It's very detailed, but look at what people were describing. Do these look like balloons? Do these look like flocks of birds or geese? We need to take these issues seriously, and thanks very much to Mr. Stanton Friedman and other precursors and valiant researchers that offered hours and hours of careful research and much of their time and their lives facing controversies and all kinds of problems because of speaking for the truth, something that scientists should care to investigate. But there's a question: should we just consider doing research in order to conclude that a percentage of these objects are unknowns? Or should we go deeper and try to find the answers of what they are? I think that the latter is the new opportunity coming back after the recent revelations by To the Stars Academy. When these things are going to be taken seriously, more scientists would have to get involved, should get involved, and we can take the next step of finding out who they are. Perhaps many people have already found out who they are or what they are. We're talking about experiencers and contactees, and we are not listening to them carefully, but we should. Beyond UFOs being a social taboo in the US, the taboo is almost universal, not only due to a disinformation and dismissive campaign installed in the 1950s after a series of dramatic UFO sightings within the United States, but more importantly, the taboo is due to the modern ethos. It goes well with modernity's rejection of things otherworldly in general. For instance, also within the Peruvian Air Force, I met many officers and personnel who had witnessed UFOs, sometimes at close range, but who also were reluctant to speak openly about this, afraid that they would be laughed at by their peers, or that their mental stability would be questioned and that their careers would suffer. So it's not only a taboo subject in the United States, it's a taboo subject wherever there are modern institutions in the world. Perhaps in the early 1950s, there was a window of opportunity for the US government to reveal the UFO and otherworldly presence. It was a time in which many alleged contactees came forth describing physical contacts with human-looking, flesh and blood, otherworldly beings. I say that it was perhaps a window of opportunity to reveal this publicly, because these beings were very similar to us, and even if they were part of a larger consortium of beings, it would have been easier for us to relate with them. It was probably an era in which the army was held in high regard. It was after the Second World War, and they could have given an explanation about what these things were that people would have taken seriously. They would have been a strong presence to educate the public and to establish a necessary open relationship with these beings, beginning with those that look so similar to us. But the necessary government leaders at the time and cultural leaders did not rise to the occasion. There might be another opportunity now that the issue is becoming more credible, and perhaps this time the required world leaders will rise to the occasion. Care about this we must, but is it too late already for us to evolve as a planetary species in time to avert ungovernability, social implosion, and ecological catastrophe? I say this because I think that the more integrated connecting patterns needed to understand the UFO phenomenon could give us a means to reframe what we think we know about reality and to intelligently adapt to the extreme exterior quadrants and systemic complexity that we are generating in the world today. A few years ago, a French committee formed by high-level government officers, high-ranking military personnel, and scientists associated with the French aerospace program published the so-called Cometa report. After analyzing many UFO cases for 7 years, they concluded that in about 5% of them, the best reasonable hypothesis was the extraterrestrial hypothesis. This would also mean that in some cases, Occam's razor would best be applied by privileging this hypothesis. A few years later, other high-ranking officers, like scientist and Apollo 14 astronaut Dr. Edgar Mitchell, Colonel Philip Corso, who served in World War II with distinction and also under President Eisenhower, and former Canadian Minister of Defense Paul Hellyer, came out publicly announcing that unconventional, technologically advanced, otherworldly UFOs were real, together along with the non-human intelligences associated with them. Already, some Russian cosmonauts and generals had pronounced themselves similarly, and soon thereafter, Russian Prime Minister Medvedev mentioned about the existence of extraterrestrials in an interview that some qualify as serious and others as a joke. But it was very strange and suspicious. But can we purposefully interact with the otherworldly beings? I think so. Yes. I recently participated in 2 so-called programmed sightings, one in the Atacama Desert in northern Chile, and previously in another one in Mount Shasta, California. Programmed sightings are intentional participatory sightings in which a bona fide contactee receives a clear telepathic or psychographic communication by which he or she is given permission to invite other persons to witness and in some cases record the sighting, which may include researchers and reporters. Specific dates and times are given. People prepare themselves respectfully for the sighting. They may fast a little bit, they meditate, they get into a resonant alpha state, and things happen. In Mount Shasta, before a group of about 40 persons, several objects appeared. Among them, a well-defined reddish-orange lenticular or oblong object appeared and remained for several minutes just above the pine tree line, some 1,000 to 1,500 feet away from our group. And in the Atacama Desert, a stationary light began to pulsate, and pulsated for about 114 times above our campground, with more than 300 witnesses. In the latter case, we checked that there were no geostationary satellites or iridium flare satellites. A Chilean and a Canadian team with video recording equipment were able to film part of the sighting. The point here is that by scientists also treating these procedures with empathy and respect, then programmed sightings may evolve, opening the possibility of repeatedly and experimentally interacting with the phenomenon, which might gradually become more responsive, allowing us to study it more easily under the scientific method and with scientific instruments. But why isn't this taking place, and why haven't scientists already joined in? The sentiments. But the sentiments of scientists not wanting to have anything to do with contactees. Not all of them, but perhaps most of them. Contactees imbued by a sense of spiritual mission. These sentiments have to change. As much as sentimentally prone, spiritually idealist persons supporting these contact experiences would have to appreciate even more the contributions of careful, critical thinking, objectivity, and scientific studies. The phenomenon therefore calls us to unite integratively. The phenomenon calls us, already responding under different social approaches, to come together respectfully, comprehensively, for truth's sake and for the sake of adapting to it. In some of the mission Rama related contacts, there are contacts with almost non-physical, highly evolved and benevolent beings of light. Also with physical, more solid, also benevolent beings. But the easiest way to contact them is through heartfelt sentiment, kindness, compassion, love, respect. Sentiment that apparently surpasses the intellect. If our minds do not understand these beings' intellects yet, perhaps the sentiment that connects in a more fundamental level, in a sacred way, in a friendly way, is a way to smooth out the ground and of understanding each other in a more elemental way. As my new friend Marcela Velasco would agree, ultimately, contact is a heart-to-heart relationship, a soul connection based on respect, unconditional love, and oneness. Perhaps author and experiencer Mr. Whitley Strieber, apparently contacting different kinds of beings such as the Greys, or those generally called the Greys, because there are differences among them, would also agree with this statement today. His experience evolved from one of terror to one of greater and greater communion in peace. The phenomenon calls all of us to leave behind excessive polarizing prejudices and to reach a clearer species-wide unified understanding through a conversing and integrative attitude. We need a dialogical approach. We also need to verify truth claims associated with the phenomenon through various methodological means. Quite likely under an enhancement of the 8 methodological perspectives described in integral theory. Quite likely considering how a trans-realm understanding may apply to these perspectives integratively. But do we also have concrete physical evidence? Yes. Besides analyzed UFO photographs from many decades ago, when the possibility of trickery through computer imaging was not available. Besides great witnesses, credible witnesses, there were also landing traces and such. But there was more. There is more now. Besides several alleged alien implants emitting electromagnetic waves and possessing unique nanotechnological characteristics and off-planet isotopic ratios, implants that were not rejected by the body and apparently produce like an organic substance that connects with local tissue and nerves, implants that were studied in serious labs, previously being removed by podiatric surgeon Dr. Roger Lear, there also is a unique collection of metamaterials, allegedly coming from UFO debris or released by UFOs during certain events. These metamaterials are artificially made and possess unique nanotechnological qualities, as well as non-earthly isotopic ratios. One or more of these metamaterials was and is being studied by researchers like information scientist and ufologist Jacques Vallée, by experimental and zero-point theoretical physicist Dr. Hal Puthoff, and by Dr. Paul Chu, an expert in superconductivity. At least one of these metamaterials that was acquired by To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences, TTSA, is being studied under a formal CRADA, C-R-A-D-A, contract with the U.S. Army, an institution offering a laboratory facility to find practical applications. While the while there are natural phenomena that are confused with UFOs, and while there may be very advanced military craft that can also be so confused, the possibility that there might also exist advanced vehicles not made by human hands is now, in 2019, being more formally confirmed both to the general public and to the US Congress. This greater formal process stems from former US intelligence officers, from Navy officers, and from relevant scientists and engineers with high security clearances, decisively turning the UFO subject into a legitimate issue that can be seriously discussed among modern, educated people, academicians, and politicians. We must recognize previous important political and academic pioneers in the field of ufology. People like Peter Stark, scientist that risked his credibility to provide clear-cut evidence that the phenomenon was physically real and that it behaved in unconventional ways. But we must also recognize that the initiative carried on by the aforementioned TTSA personnel, highly credible individuals, gives representatives of major social institutions a greater implicit permission to credibly talk about UFOs without looking silly. Educated attitudes against UFOs are changing. The tables are turning. Furthermore, the US Navy is facilitating a sighting reporting policy to its members. All of this occurs in addition to decades in which quite a few other countries have been declassifying and releasing their UFO files. And some of these files describe interactions with the phenomenon, and sometimes with human-looking, humanoid, exotic, and other types of intelligent entities. Besides all of these, for many years, there have also been credible reports of UFOs deactivating nuclear missile silos, something that can either be interpreted as a threat or, more benevolently, as a warning. We need to find out who these beings are and why are they doing this. The facts can no longer be ignored without appearing to be out of touch with reality, intellectually passé, dogmatic, or silly. Definitely, our theories should change in accordance with the facts. Contactees have been saying for years, for many years, that the otherworldly beings do not approach us because they don't want to hurt our society, because we need to prepare, we need to be ready for it. And their behavior is like appearing in order to stimulate more people thinking about them, but not forcing issues, not forcing the issue. Maybe in this way they appear to match the whatever cover-up there could have been. They could end this lack of knowledge of their presence if they wanted to. I think that the way we behave with each other and how we treat the world we inhabit may change for the better if we can intelligently assimilate the reality of these otherworldly contacts. As previously stated, perhaps in the early 1950s, there was a window of opportunity to reveal the UFO and otherworldly presence, to take the bull by the horns, educating the public and establishing a necessary open relationship with an association of humanity-supportive, otherworldly beings, starting with the ones that look similar to us. Again, perhaps today there is another opportunity if the revelations by To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences and what may come afterward are well received, processed, and intelligently conversed, nationally, regionally, internationally. When I was a student at John F. Kennedy University studying management and later on integral theory, even in this highly progressive university, I found little interest in a subject that could change in so many ways the way we think about reality and about who we think we are. It is a subject, after all, linked to ontology, to a more advanced science, apparently allowing other beings to overcome enormous spatial distances, to understand the interface between the mind and the body. A subject possibly linked to undeciphered aspects of our human origins and to more comprehensive models, to a renewed spiritual and metaphysical understanding, and to how other intelligences may have advanced beyond our current social developmental stages without destroying themselves. Of course, it is also linked to the possibility of enhancing integral theory itself. But how come a hyper-technological, futuristic phenomenon is more clearly accepted by pre-modern, magical, shamanic thinking persons, and not by modern, postmodern, and early integral stage persons? Well, on the one hand, magical stage individuals are said not to be able to unambiguously distinguish between subjective and objective experiences. Thus, anything that comes into their experience is accepted as real. Unless contacted by modernity, they may not feel the need to favor exterior physical patterns that match a classic modern view of the world. Any experienced phenomenon would be equally real to them, and if they perceive it, they naturally feel capable of relating to it. What I am proposing here is that the genuinely otherworldly UFO phenomenon is an inter-realm phenomenon, both physical and interactive, with what in integral theory and Vedanta and other non-dual but also empirical traditions is recognized as the subtle realm. Interacting with physically detectable vehicles that use the subtle realm to reprogram their physical states would naturally produce liminal, high strangeness phenomena located between the physically established and the imaginal. Due to the high strangeness effects and synchronicities and paranormal psychokinetic effects, besides precognitions, retrocognitions, and missing time periods connected with partially forgotten interactions with otherworldly intelligences, we cannot disdain its psychic and intersubjective components. Furthermore, thinking about the ways by which close encounters with the phenomenon interact with the mind in dreams and visions, and also through increased out-of-body experiences, besides being a strong catalyst for the expansion of one's personal worldviews and how much of reality we can accommodate in our consciousness space, we can say that it uses an artificially enhanced interface, which in my inter-realm model is determined by the difference between the more symmetrical, causally interactive connection existing between interior and exterior subtle realm quadrants and the more asymmetrical, causally interactive connection related with physical quadrants. Individuals predominantly situated in a magical stage who think that everything, including non-biological objects, possess subjectivity, also have an easier time relating to this phenomenon intersubjectively, because they tend to reduce reality to subjective and intersubjective experience. While generally speaking this is a less comprehensive understanding, it also allows them an easier time to deal with multiple physical and non-physical realities, an ease of experiential access, which in itself can also be understood as fundamental and as permanently integral, and which should have been preserved as a basic truth across subsequent cultural stages. So how should we as integralists relate with the truly otherworldly UFO, perhaps better called interreality vehicles? How should we relate with the truly otherworldly in an objective and intersubjective contact phenomenon sense? First, by recognizing that we cannot treat it only in a rigidly objective, classic, modern scientific manner. That our scientific model has to be enhanced. That the way it blurs the distinction between objective and subjective experience is in itself a fundamental component that can help us to understand this issue. We should also ask if we have inherited a highly distorted modern ethos, blinding our transition into post-modernity and into integrality. An ethos that has disabled our possibilities for nourishing a more meaningful cultural order. We think the exterior hypercomplexity that derives from an exacerbated, dependent focus on material technological prowess. Inasmuch as magical thinking individuals are better able to deal with various kinds of otherworldly contact phenomena, they can be considered as more integrative, at least in some manner, or in certain lines of development. If you go to the Amazon jungle or isolated villages in the Andes, you may find many individuals that consider the UFO presence as in a natural way, and even refer stories that their grandfathers or fathers communicated with these beings openly, and sometimes they are still communicating with these beings openly. But when civilization, modern civilization, encroaches upon them, things begin to change for the worse. Today the tables against excessive materialist dogmatic skepticism are turning, and the UFO phenomenon is becoming a legitimate academic and scientific subject, precisely at a time when faith in democracy is declining worldwide, when humanity is forgetting its democratic ideals that rose and multiplied, especially after World War II, in which more countries became democratic. And too many newly empowered people are willing to use any means to acquire wealth and personal advantage. This has always existed, but today it's like more people that are connected and informed have been influenced by a neoliberal, commercialist, materialist way of thinking, which they feel they aren't just empowered. They are more connected, more empowered, and their voices are more heard, but they feel like breaking the norms of society in order to get their points across, sometimes in a violent way. Collectively speaking, we may need some kind of cultural shock to move us out of complacency with the social, political, and economic systems and pre-integral interpretations created, including faith-based and scientific interpretations, both of which could improve, change, be enhanced, their core truths not necessarily suffer. An eye-opening surprise. We need to activate the evolutionary impulse of Eros, something with which Ken Wilber may agree, and to feel the imperious, pre-verbal, and also post-rational need to change our dominant worldviews, currently geared towards the selfish, inordinate, external, reductionist technological control of nature. At least too much of it. Control of each other, of social groups, of all sentient life, and eventually of all experience through exterior means. Let me give you a brief overview of details about the current social situation in the world today. Besides gains in public health, life expectancy, the growth of a middle class worldwide, more interconnected, more access to information, greater literacy, although the middle class has stagnated in some places, although less people are dying in wars, as Steve Pinker points out truthfully, but also our short-term status-seeking, fear-based tendencies and biosocial evolutionary adaptations seem to be stubbornly destroying the life world through our actions, with which, generally speaking, a life world with which we don't really feel personally connected anymore, at least perhaps the majority of the population, especially when the neoliberal economic system demands from us to assign a commercial value to almost everything, promoting constant distractions in entertainment and vain status-seeking in-group, out-group identity values. Now, I'm not a communist, I'm not a Marxist, but I also see that this materialist culture is hurting society and life in our world. As mentioned before, worldwide, people are losing faith in the ideals of democracy. They're too far removed from their forefathers that made the current international classic liberal order. Social institutions cannot keep up with competing social demands and often unreasonable expectations from masses of people. Different kinds of expectations. Growing expectations of frustration intolerant people, unwilling to respect the social order and norms. Claiming their rights, but also very easily willing to protest in destructive ways. Whether their causes are a lack of identity, losing their power in society, poverty, feeling like second-class citizens, or whether their causes are religious, as they feel that the modern world is destroying their traditional values. While the classic liberal international social order based on equal human dignity is weakening, easily overtaken by self-serving politicians, a cynical population, and personal, identitarian, and corporate interests, manipulating the system. So, as a species, we appear to stubbornly hold on to tribal, religious, dogmatic, and hyper-nationalist, divisive attitudes, and to self-serving behaviors, at a time when we need to come together as a species, not only to face the UFO phenomenon and the UFO intelligences and to adapt to that reality constructively, but also while a mass extinction of species is taking place, and while microplastic invasion, the renewed proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, climate change, and rising ocean levels are complicating everything. The connectivity of a hyper-complex, high-tech world empowering people with many choices, as well as potential restrictions on genuine freedom and self-determination, is unmanageable today under prevailing mindsets. Is it any wonder why some contacts with the otherworldly seem to be about creating a hybrid species, perhaps capable of living on the planet without destroying it? Perhaps it should not be considered as an invasion, this aspect of the relationship with these otherworldly beings. Perhaps it should be considered as an opportunity to survive, at least part of us, in other bodies, under other bodies, hybrid bodies. These are very serious things that have to be considered. if we don't make it as a species that respects each other, respects the world, respects cosmic beings, respects the whole community of life, shouldn't we evolve somehow or be forced to evolve? It's something to consider. I wish it didn't happen this way, though. We have information overload, a crowded, overpopulated, fast-paced world, and an increasing lack of privacy. It is a complexity that includes artificial actors like the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, beginning to make its own decisions, virtual persons, 3D printing at home, which can print weapons, for instance, general surveillance, asymmetric warfare, 24 hours a day, 5G and above connectivity, continuous hacking attempts, connected intelligent devices sharing our data that can be sold, self-programming artificial intelligence, personalized genetic design, and the proliferation of drones and robots, which some of which are steadily replacing us in many tasks. I propose that to make sense of it all in an adaptive and fundamentally new way, we need to understand the underlying connectivity at the root of physicality, a connectivity used by genuine otherworldly UFOs. I mean the connectivity found in the subtle realm. From an absolute perspective, a more fundamental realm, also recognized by integral theory and in various ways by ancient mystical and experiential traditions, and which, according to some rational metaphysical interpretations, provides the possibilities that cohere as physical actualities or manifestations. According to Ken Wilber's excerpt G, greater complexity of form is normally correlated or accompanied by more meaningfulness, or the capacity for more meaningfulness. This usually applies to biological forms, but extrapolating onto society, greater complexity and exterior connectivity in social systems should be accompanied by a greater descent, involution, involvement, or presence of meaningfulness in terms of subjectivity and culture. Nonetheless, we seem to stubbornly hold on to a simpler either-or binary dichotomous way of thinking and being, emphasizing exteriority, lack of trust, and classic separations in space and time, including a proclivity for forming in-groups and out-groups and self-serving dominant hierarchies. Something which perhaps was more tolerable when living in a simpler, less artificially connected, technologically scarce physical environment. So we need a cultural change in order to be able to deal with our complexity, the exterior complexity that is encroaching us due to our technology. We need a cultural change in order to survive and make sense of all these challenges that affect our freedom and decision making and humanity, all the challenges that I just mentioned. We need to change. And the UFO phenomenon and the possibilities that it is connected with a subtle realm through which it produces, it modifies space-time and produces what we call anomalous effects is crucial. We need to create a culture that connects with the UFO, understands the UFO phenomenon. It is a great opportunity for us to evolve and understand more of reality through the UFO phenomenon, and also to understand a greater sense of what being physical means as derived from the potentials given by the subtle realm. To avoid a pre-trans fallacy in the integral stage, whose more comprehensive premises ought to be useful already to relate better with the UFO phenomenon, we can reconcile the subjective and objective quadrants, not by blending these quadrants indistinctively, nor by reverting to a magical stage of understanding, rather by considering that they are distinct but mutually necessary and complementing of each other, and not just correlated or co-arising, but interactive under a more inclusive and fundamental pattern, a pattern that would rest at the basis of our physical origins. I think that to expand beyond current insufficient either-or binary ways of thinking and interpreting the world, even under the current complexity that we exist upon, and to survive as a species in the physical world, At present, we need to accept contact with the subtle realm and its fundamental importance while living physical lives in physical bodies. It is not a cop-out. It is not about escaping physicality. It is about living physically under higher wisdom and connectivity and the patterns that connect. The connectedness in this realm, the subtle realm, is greater. It is at the core of the origin of physicality, I believe. Its more primordial connecting patterns can teach us how to think metasystemically, to value harmonious, synergistic forms of connectivity over a personal separation-based struggle against entropic decadence and inertia. It can even teach us to modify space-time configurations and provide us with technology that can ease our lives in the physical realm to our benefit, using its more comprehensive possibilities. I believe that many inter-reality faring cosmic civilizations have learned to use the subtle realm. Now, how should we treat the UFO phenomenon? Should we treat it as enemies, as we normally treat xenophobically things that are or intelligences and communities that are different from us? I really don't think so. I think that we should grow up, especially as we are being challenged planetary-wide to become a more intelligent, coherent species. In order to gain sovereignty, perhaps this is more speculative, but in order to gain sovereignty under the eyes of a cosmic community, we may have to learn to live together, to respect nature, and to consider an intelligent relationship with such cosmic community. We cannot simply repeat this. The shoot them down policy of the early 1950s, well documented by this author, Frank Feschino Jr. It's natural to look at a foreign object that we don't know its origin, flying over restricted or not restricted, but over our national airspaces with contempt and fear and lack of trust. This is why we need to understand and be able to distinguish, especially now in the era of drones and hyper fast missiles. We need to distinguish UFOs from other worlds, genuine otherworldly UFOs, from these drones and other advanced human technological objects, in order to avoid confusion, possible wars, possible serious mistakes about it. We need to be able to distinguish. Perhaps there is already a way to track genuine UFOs, or some of them leaving traces, special traces like hit signatures, no hit signatures, ionization in the air, etc. This has to be researched, radiation effects, etc. This has to be researched carefully. But we cannot simply respond in a primitive way. We cannot simply decide to shoot them down. We need to understand them first. This is very important. Also, not to get in trouble with a variety of them which may decide that we are not worth their patience. We have to really study this. Now, I'm not saying that they're all positive and airy-fairy, beautiful and kind to us. No. According to contactee information also, some are not. But we need to become more sophisticated in our response. We need to be very careful. We need to know who our allies are. I think that the otherworldly UFO presence in itself is a hyper object, persistently challenging our sense of reality and our cultural and societal adaptations across space and time. I think that it blurs the distinction between the subjective and objective quadrants because the UFOs use a both-and logic. A logic that would prevail specifically in the subtle realm. These hyper-objects may also produce intermediate states, semi-physical, subtle realm produced effects, interactive effects, to manifest on different space-time coordinates, and possibly, if multiverse theories are correct, a variety of physical universes. Said differently, two distinct modes of being would interface. UFOs force us to grow beyond what we consider to be ontologically real, and this is what we need at this time in order to evolve our cultures. accepting a both-and logic is not a regression into the quadratic non-differentiation of a previous stage, but a refinement into a more comprehensive understanding under a more fundamental pattern that not only includes classical forms of logic, we don't need to abandon classical forms of logic, but to include them under a more inclusive logical pattern. In this way, we will be able to transcend and connect otherwise incompatible opposites, including philosophical opposites and dogmatic religious opposites, by which we easily conflict. But if we saw things from a higher perspective of their essential teachings, and also that they don't have to oppose irreconcilably, then this would be part of the intelligent conversation we need around UFOs and around who we are and about what we believe and about to create in order to create a more comprehensive world philosophy and culture. We don't need to abandon common sense. Instead, to transcend it and include it when appropriate. We need to activate our potentials to becoming more multi-perspectival and comprehensive. This is urgent, urgent. If we are to survive as a humanity, I believe we need to really educate the masses of individuals to be self-critical and also to be able to understand reality more with multiple perspectives, including the truths of other peoples in a rationally comprehensive and logical way, coherent way. So this is an integrative endeavor that has to happen.